Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto video. This is going to be my speculation ahead of the release of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex Chapter 12, which I believe is coming out on the 19th. So it's a day earlier than usual. So straight away, as I've been doing the last few times, I'm doing the speculation after we get the preview page, the official preview page for the chapter. So this is one of the pages from chapter 12, and so we see it's Boruto facing off against Hidari, and Hidari kind of comes in with an attack, Boruto blocks, and then sort of does one of those kind of Kakashi style, jutsus while doing something else, in a way type thing, and sends Hidari flying backwards while defending Himawari. I believe people who have kind of tried to translate this, I think for Boruto, this is a new jutsu. I don't think this is just the Gale Palm thing that he does. I think this is a jutsu that's a little bit kind of above that. But still, cool enough. But I obviously, I would say, I don't think it tells us too much about the chapter, because where the last chapter ended, Boruto's literally standing in front of Hidari. So of course there was going to be, I guess, some sort of conflict, and this is just highlighting that, okay, we get something here. But is it the full-on, this is what the chapter is? Because a lot of the times the preview pages can be misleading. This doesn't mean we're going to get like a full chapter of Boruto versus Hidari. We could very much go from Boruto pushes him back, dialogue starts to happen, and we get no sense of really what's kind of happening after that. So let's get into things here. We'll take a reflection on chapter 11 and then get into some speculation points. So what happened last chapter? With Himawari, we learned a few things about like the fact that she's a Jinchuriki now, but to a certain degree it brings up the idea of she seems to be this almost like next level Jinchuriki. There is something very special about the idea that, the Nine Tails hasn't been sealed inside of her, but actually kind of reborn within her. So there's no sealing jutsu, maybe restricting this combination. So it is this real true kind of merging of human and tail beast, and we even, I think, got this referred to as the idea of almost like it's Himawari becoming the tail beast, which is ultimately what a lot of the Jinchuriki transformations sort of are. Like, that's the whole point of this power. It's a human, channeling a Jinchuriki, a tail beast through themselves, and a lot of the times it's sort of Nine-Tailed Fox power or whatever coming out. But they're saying that there's almost like a higher potential for combination here with Himawari because she has this potential beyond any other Jinchuriki. We see that the healing is particularly incredible, and the fact that she can do this to other people is very, very notable. Already, seconds into her powers, she can use tail beast bombs, and Jura notes that this is something special, that this is different than just a standard Jinchuriki. But of course, right now, she is still outmatched by Jura. Now, I think a lot of that is just that this was her first time harnessing these powers. She's had no time to actually train with them, but there was clearly a lot of potential here. But she's out of action for now, because they highlighted that the healing requires a lot of chakra, and so unless she gets back up to full, I think we're maybe not going to see the transformation happen immediately anytime soon. So, on the Hidari side of the story, of course, we get the idea that mostly what this explores is sort of the idea of character-wise, what is the connection between Hidari and Sasuke, and ultimately, he doesn't seem to know who Sasuke is. Obviously, it is what he is based on, what some of the jutsus he's using is based on, but it's not this idea that he is channeling everything about Sasuke through him. It's like these are the materials effectively he can use, but he's not actually aware of the identity of the person he has trapped. But the whole dynamic is obviously that the one person whose identity is important is his target. He knows who Sarada is, and he wants to greatly know what it means, what will happen to him if he devours his target. Sarada Uchiha, what happens if he actually, does what he wants to do? He's trying to figure out who he is. This is kind of what they're all trying to do. That they have this, like, urge, of course, as a divine tree to consume an Otsutsuki. Yes, but then they also have this secondary urge, which is to specifically target one person who is, of course, not an Otsutsuki. And what's that really about? That seems to be maybe one of the true character things that really comes through from the person that they're based on. And it seems to be some sense of the idea of the target is someone that the trapped person in the tree loves or has a strong connection to, as far as we're aware. So obviously with Bug and Ada, there's a bit of a weirdness there, but because Ada's whole thing was about kind of like everyone's attracted to her, and he was the one who looked after her while she was in sort of stasis all that time, I'm guessing they're going to go for some sort of an idea of just he developed an obsession with her. Of course, you have the father-daughter relationship between Sasuke and Sarada. And then what are the other combinations that we have here? Jura's target is Naruto. This is the one where it's maybe not super clear like why exactly that is the case, but also we don't have direct confirmation of who Jura is based on. Is it Ishiki? It's sort of unclear in that sense, obviously. And then Matsuri, who's of course based on Moegi, her target is Konohamaru, because we get the sense that obviously there's a connection there with them as a team, but is there also a potential romantic thing that they're maybe building towards there? Who knows? But that seems to be the obvious idea. So it's almost the idea of if they defeat their target, almost like, do they gain more humanity because they've consumed this like emotion or something like that? It's interesting to see what the angle on it is, because our assumption is probably that if you kill the Divine Tree character, you free the person who is trapped in the tree, but we don't actually know that that's the case. And then yeah, Boruto arrives, and that's the big cliffhanger ending to the chapter. So you know, it was a good chapter, but there maybe wasn't any giant reveals. It was mostly setup of like, okay, where are we going? What are we building towards? So getting into speculation, of course, the preview shows us Boruto versus Hidari. It makes sense. They're standing right next to each other. They're going to have some sort of a fight. But how big of a fight is it going to be? Is it just an exchange, or are we actually having a partial fight here? Because I don't think we're getting any final fights here. I don't think any characters are going to be like killed off at this stage. So is it just a case that Boruto will force Jura and Hidari to retreat? Because without the other two Divine Tree characters here, it feels like, well, we're not doing the full plot yet, of course, because we need Matsuri to face off against Konohamaru and Moegi's team. So, you know, we don't have that in place just yet. And I'd be really surprised if they full-on separated those two, because ultimately it's probably the two more important Divine Tree characters who are here. So it would be weird to put the maybe two lesser ones behind the scenes. So I think a retreat and setting up a calm sequence of chapters is probably going to happen. It's just how exactly do we get there? Which is where we bring up some of the complexities about the idea that, like, Boruto shot past Kawaki on his way to get here first. Kawaki, I guess that means is going to arrive shortly, but Kawaki is not up to standard right now. That's what we know. He is just, if he goes in and tries to use his powers to their fullest, he is going to mess Boruto up and get the village in a lot of trouble, because they'll have no one to combat anyone on this level. Boruto seems to be able to do that, but even we've seen with him, it is a little bit of a challenge. So, Kawaki has to be careful with what he does when he arrives, because he could cause a major problem here and get himself in trouble. So he might have to just accept that I have to not use my powers and stay in the background here and let Boruto do what he needs to do. The other point potentially that they do here is, well, we didn't actually see what happens when Boruto loses it. That if the karma fully takes over, what are we talking about happening here? Is it just Momoshiki takes over at that point and that's its own problem, of course. That's something we want to avoid. Is there specifically something with Boruto's karma and its power level that is different? Is that actually what maybe is going to happen? Because that's certainly a way to sort of cause a bit of a retreat to happen. That if Boruto goes full power assisted by or controlled by Momoshiki, that's a power probably enough to force these two to retreat, because they're not going to know how to handle that potentially. But then also it's the idea of, well, two Divine Tree characters are going to be confronted by Otsutsuki characters, and their drive is going to be to want to consume them, and that's their like fundamental thing. So in a way, Jura and Hidari retreating would be a sign of their growing intelligence, that they can go past what their primal instincts are, basically. So there's a few character things they could do with however they attempt to resolve this ultimately. Again, it's a chapter divisible by 4, so it's a volume ending chapter. So usually that means something big is going to happen or be revealed, or it's a setup for the next volume to be particularly notable. Now, ultimately, we're in the middle of action already, so what actually is going to happen here? It does feel like Momoshiki finally being talked about is one of the big things they can get to. Otherwise, it probably is something we can't really expect. Boruto, I think the implication is that he knows maybe a little bit more about what the deal is with these Divine Tree characters. Maybe there's some truth about them that he can actually reveal, but is that big enough? So I think we are all maybe thinking that the Boruto going Momoshiki crazy, or whatever the Momoshiki dynamic is in Two Blue Vortex, is probably the big thing we want to get towards. And then it's just like from a story perspective, you know, like, are we going to retreat to build up to later on in the story the big battle where we're actually going to see finishes to fights, characters potentially getting killed, getting big victories in fights, that sort of thing? Because we're expecting there to be this like major conflict, all 4 Divine Tree characters in play. We pair off, we have our fights, and we have, you know, all the obvious ones of, I guess, Demon and Ada going up against the bug one. Maybe we'll get his name at some point soon. Matsuri against Konohamaru, and like, you know, Shikadai and everyone. Sarada, of course, going up against Hidari. Maybe Sarada and Boruto against Hidari. The problem is that, like, Jura's fight, who he should be going up against, it feels like Boruto has a connection to both of them, but it doesn't feel like Sarada is presented on the level where she's a one-on-one counter for Hidari, but we don't know what her skill set is exactly just yet. And the likelihood is that, like, if any character is probably going to be involved in 2 of these fights, it is Boruto, so I think that's perfectly fine. But what other characters are going to get, like, involved in this is the real question. So are we retreating and then building up to something later, or are we going to get, like, this situation right now evolves and suddenly Matsuri and the bug Divine Tree character arrive on the scene? That's certainly a way to kind of build it up, of like, it's already bad with 2 of them there, the other 2 arriving would make it even worse. I think it's the plot, there's too much kind of going on that we do need to calm things down. So I think a retreat probably is the more likely thing, because this then creates a dynamic where if Boruto causes them to retreat in whatever way, we then potentially need to resolve the Boruto situation of, like, Boruto is the only counter to these people. He's the only defense the village really has. And so the village is going to have to acknowledge that, hey, we can't just have you stay away from the village and us, like, try to attack you anytime you come in. We kind of need you here for defense, basically. And even though Kawaki, I guess, is going to be very opposed to this, this is going to maybe need to be a thing that happens. And this is what it felt like they were building towards after the first few chapters, but then they went, no, you have to stay away. But now the potential for attacks is too high, and it does feel like you have to commit to doing this now, because we need to get the Boruto Kawaki dynamic. I think we need to have Boruto allowed to just talk to people in the village, and not just always be on the outside kind of going in. And especially now that, you know, he's met up with Himawari, who's just there, Sarada, of course. We need to have Boruto be able to openly interact with these characters. Obviously, Kawaki's lies, I guess, will continue to fracture during all of this, because that's the build up in the background of, like, we have these enemies which we have to deal with now. So it's like, enemy of my enemy is my friend. But after that, we do have to eventually build towards the opening page of original Boruto, which is Boruto versus Kawaki. That has to still go down. That's what the setup basically between series kind of is about. It's Boruto needing to knock some sense into Kawaki. Now, is that the finale of the story? I don't think so. I do think we will probably see the story evolve to becoming more... the actual Otsutsuki clan will properly come into play, and we're going to deal with it once and for all. In terms of, you know, we need to eventually get to a situation where we stop alien invaders basically just arriving and causing chaos wherever they arrive. So permanently stopping the Otsutsuki threat to the world is something that needs to happen. And yeah, I think just in general, we need some time after everything that's happened to take stock. The village needs to, like, all the characters need to talk about, you know, Himawari, now that she has the Nine Tails, and what does that mean? Her being a Jinchuriki, but like a special Jinchuriki, who goes about helping her to train on that sort of side of things, especially with Naruto not around or in play. And then, you know, we're kind of, because she has the Nine Tails inside of her, it's kind of like we want to maybe get to a situation where Himawari and Naruto talk again, because he's the only other one really with the experience of being a Jinchuriki, unless Killer Bee's coming back into play. Amado he's probably going to have something to say about what's going on in all of this. The Kebi situation, is that going to get brought up again? Because that's been an open plot point for quite a while now. And then, of course, how much information does Boruto have about these new enemies? We know he's encountered them in the past, but does he know anything specific? Like, what is the way to get the captured people back? And then just generally speaking, it feels like this was what we're doing now, this action is sort of the shock of everyone realizing the power of the enemy they're up against. So they're going to need to train ahead of the bigger fights that are inevitably going to have to happen. Because the village, I think, is always going to be on lockdown, on defense. And then the Divine Tree characters, of course, are eventually going to want to go for their targets. Now, this is where maybe Jura comes into play in terms of his target is Naruto. He refocused on Himawari because he found her interesting, but as far as we're aware, his target is still Naruto. And maybe that plot point will get brought up again, of the fact that, okay, there's some confusion because we found out Himawari was a Jinchuriki, but he was still here looking for Naruto, and he seemed pretty sure about it. What is the situation there? Like, more and more people are going to be like, Kawaki, you are the one who basically confirmed Naruto's dead, basically, so what is the situation? Especially because Boruto kind of announced that earlier on, and more and more characters are beginning to see through the omniscience and omnipotence and stuff like that. That's what I think we need at this point. That I like the action, but I do think we need to take a bit of a character focus break to just give some information, basically. And I think that's really all I have to talk about here. I wish there was a bit more to speculate on. I just think we're in a section in the story where we mainly need to get the big writing decision of, are we doing this or are we doing this? And that will give us a bit of a direction, and then we'll know if, okay, we're actually going to do some big, more fighting-based events, or are we going to do some big character-based events coming up? I think the character direction is probably the way to go, and we build towards these big fights with the Divine Tree characters. Because, like I said, probably the biggest thing in all of this is, I would say, Inojin still needs to recover. Even though Himawari healed him, she's like, he's probably get checked over, so he's still kind of recovering from nearly being killed. He needs to be ready for the fight to come, because he's going to be involved in that against the Moegi one, I'm guessing. And because the Matsuri character is not in play yet, I think that's probably what kind of confirms that, like, okay, we're not doing everything right now. we have to have a bit of a break, I think. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. What do you think is going to happen in chapter 12? Do you think it will be a big chapter as the volume ending chapter? Do you think they're going to finally do something with Momoshiki? Are we going to do a big Boruto reveal or what? And then I suppose, will we see the retreat of Jura and Hidari, or are we actually doing stuff here with the fight? Let me know what you think. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.